And this is Lake Houston, according to HGAC's 2010 description of land use. Green is open, undeveloped land. This is our primary reservoir. And this is how they see the lake in 2040. Our primary reservoir and all its tributary waters completely organized. I think between these slides it describes a situation that is both extraordinary and alarming, and I'm very happy to have these distinguished people come to help us figure out what it all means.
This certainly is a very timely forum. Some of you may have realized that we're in a bit of a drought. There was actually a point earlier this, I think it was late spring, when if you looked at the amount of rainfall that Houston had gotten during the 3-month period, it was less than parts of the Sahara normally get during 3 months. In 120 years of meteorological records for the city of Houston, there's never been a spring and summer growing season that's been this dry. And there's no relief, in sight in the short term or even in the long term. The outlooks are fairly grim. So we just don't know the long-term effects this is going to have on the natural trees that this area has had for a century or more. My wife would be the first to tell you that I'm not up on styles or trends or fashion like that, but I would feel pretty comfortable in saying that brown is the new green. So before we get to the panel, I wanted to just briefly touch on a taboo subject that I think kind of needs to be in the background of our discussion this evening. I'm speaking, of course, of climate change. Now, bear in mind this occurred before Mr. Vaughan's tenure began. I certainly don't mean it as a slight to him. But in November of 2006, the Texas Water Development Board released its 5-year state water plan, and basically trying to plan for what the state would have to do to meet its water needs for the next 50 years.
The estimate is that we will be 8.3 million acre feet short if we have a drought equal to the 50s in 2060. Municipal water use will account for 41% of what we need. Municipalities will be 3.4 million acre feet short. Through the regional process and being incorporated in the state water plan, each of the regions recommended new strategies to achieve our goals for 2060. 34% of it comes from conservation and reuse. 34% comes from other surface supplies, 17% from new reservoirs, and various other strategies make up the remainder. The cost estimated to be $53 billion to implement those strategies, $12 billion of which would be for Region H. This is less than a quarter of the total estimated costs that we need. The state water plan only talks about water for the future. It doesn't talk about wastewater projects. Estimated for all water, wastewater, flood projects for the state by 2060 is $231 billion.
And that plan caused some controversy among some scientists I know at Texas A&M, climate scientists, in part because of this passage which said of climate change. The effect of climate change on the state's water resources over the next 50 years is probably small enough that it is unnecessary to plan for it specifically. Okay.
Another issue that I think has the potential to be more prevalent in the Houston area than practically anywhere else in the state is a competition for water resources. What you see here, it isn't a patchwork quilt. It may look like that, but it's actually a map of the water utilities that surround the Houston area. And this is just incredible to look at and try to imagine how all of these individual entities are able to do water planning, protect their needs, and also make those plans work out with their neighbors. The Houston area, just because of the way it's developed, is prone to potential conflicts and how different utilities are going to be fighting over water. The good news, though, is that these water providers have had some foresight in the situation and have recognized opportunities to work on a regional basis for everyone's good. In Harris County, the North, West, and Central Harris County authorities are currently providing surface water to meet the needs of a huge area. Similarly, in Fort Bend County, the North Fort Bend Water Authority has stepped up and will be providing similar services. And in Montgomery County, the San Jacinto River Authority has come forth with a plan to provide alternative water supplies for conversion from groundwater for Montgomery County. And it's things like this that we need to look at and we need to take as a lesson, so that when we move forward, we're thinking about things like this. We're not looking for ways to compete with our neighbors. We're looking at ways to work together to make it easier for everyone. And there's very good reason to consider conservation. This is just shows you some generic projects from the Region H water planning process. Just to give you an idea of what we see in cost per acre foot for different strategies. And it's very clear to see why conservation is the first strategy that's recommended in Region H.
So let's look at it from a global perspective. I stole this slide out of, I don't know, probably a UN publication. We're way up there. I think Houston's 144 gallons, but I rounded it off because Fort Bend uses more and some of the areas down around Clear Lake use more. And so let's say 150 gallons. Is your quality of life really 4 times as great as a citizen of France or Singapore? I mean, do you really need that much more water than people in other countries use? Is there something you could do in terms of your lifestyle choices that might cut down on that amount of water? Now, I got this one from Richard Browning at the Trinity River Authority. It's a survey team from the U.S. Geological Survey back in the early 1900s on the Trinity River up around Dallas. And these guys have their feet barely covered by water, and they're standing out in the middle of the Trinity River. There used to be a lot more variation in the water level in that river. Now, Chairman Vaughan talked about the dam building, I guess I shouldn't call it an orgy. The great episode of dam building in the 50s through the 70s in this state, or through the 80s, I guess, 129 reservoirs. Well, this slide shows over here the flow coming down the Trinity River before all those reservoirs were built, and then here is the flow coming down after the reservoirs were built. There's more water coming down that river. Dallas-Fort Worth is pulling in water from other sources, and it may not be a nice thing to talk about around dinner time, but you want them flushing those toilets. You know, that water molecule that you're drinking today may have been through some other person up in Dallas-Fort Worth in the last few months, but it's still a water molecule. This is more of what the Trinity River looks like today up in those regions, because the flow variation is less. Now, for some of the critters, that's not a good idea, and I said I would speak for the critters. We really want a flow variability in this river.
Question: will anthropogenic climate change, man-made global warming, be factored into the 2012 state water plan? And if so, how will it be addressed, or if not, why not?
We're still developing the 2012 plan. There is considerable discussion about climate change, about...
Pretend you're using bottled water you bought at the convenience store for everything you do at home, and see if that changes your behavior.